Hello, esteemed students of now. I am Dr. Temilola Akpeno from the Department of Educational Foundation, Faculty of Education, National Open University of Nigeria. I am your lecturer that will be taking you in EDU714 History of Education in Nigeria. In this course, we're going to discuss the concepts of history. We are going to discuss sources of history, the concept of education, forms of education, Nigeria traditional education, its aims, characteristics, methods, various stages, advantages and disadvantages. So it's going to be an enjoyable session. Do join me. Thank you. The learning outcomes for this course is that at the end of this discussion, we should be able to explain the basic concepts, history and education respectively. We should be able to discuss the two main sources of history, distinguish between formal and informal education, state the philosophy of Nigerian traditional education, list at least 4 aims of traditional education, mention some basic characteristics of traditional education, state briefly the various stages of education in the traditional society. Introduction to history of education. History is the past linked with the future, linked with the present, to determine the future. It is when we have the fact, the record of the past, we are able to compare it with the present, that we will know how to plan for the future. So from time to time, policymakers need to consider this. They need to check the past, they need to verify the present, examine the present and see how all this can be improved upon to have the best future. Historical records, they are presented in a special way, in a sequential, coherent, consistent and systematic order. It must be one step after the other. It must be consistent, it must be coherent, and the arrangement must be systematic. It must not be biased in any way. There must not be prejudice, so that whatever fact is presented will be authenticated. There are two sources of history. We have the primary source, we have the secondary source. The primary source is eyewitness account, while the secondary source is somehow reported. The primary source is more factual than the secondary source. The examples of primary source is eyewitness account like diary, journal, autobiographies, speeches, photos or videos, while the examples of the secondary source can be research or report by someone who was not there when the event took place, textbooks, monographs, statistical tables, graphs, pictures and drawings, historical novels, short stories and movies. Education. What is education? Education involves training, teaching and learning aimed at achieving desirable behavior. If knowledge is passed and there is no change in behavior, education has not taken place. If knowledge is passed, there is change in behavior, but that change is not the desirable behavior expected, education has not taken place. The act of imparting knowledge generally is what we refer to as education. It is also the process of giving and receiving systematic instruction, especially at school. There are various definitions of education by various educationists. So, like Dewey describes the education as all in one, without an end. Aristotle describes it as a process of training man to fulfill is aimed by exercising all the faculties to the fullest extent as a member of a society. There are three forms of education: the formal, the informal, and the non-formal. In the formal setting, education is planned, it is curriculum based, it involves assessment, it involves certificate, it involves trained personnel to take charge, to deliver instruction. In the case of informal setting, it is not planned, it does not involve certificate, it takes place everywhere. It can take place at home, in the church, outside, in the mosque, the media, among peers, everywhere, and everybody pass instruction there. In non-formal setting, it is planned. At times, or most of the time, it is also certificate based, but it does not fall within the regular formal system. It is only complementary to formal learning. This non-formal education can be received in seminar, in media, in workshops or correspondence, and through being apprentice under someone who is a professional. History of education is a study of education in the past with a view of improving the present and planning the future. Nigerian traditional education. Was there education in the traditional society before the coming of the Europeans to Nigeria? Yes, we had education. Our young ones were taught in various ways. They were taught in how to behave in the public. They were taught in homemaking. They were taught in various skills like farming, like blacksmithing, like leather work, like textile making, like brass and cane weaving, like mat weaving, local pottery, bead making, calabash decoration. They also involve in sports in those days, like Ayo game, like wrestling, even dancing competition. So we had our own way, we had our traditional way of impacting knowledge. What are the characteristics of Nigerian traditional education? It was a collective activity. It involves everybody in the community. It involves the father, the mother, the sister, the brother, uncles, aunties, everybody in the neighborhood, everybody in the community. It is multidimensional in terms of goals and means. Various ways are used to pass instruction, and they arrive at different goals, but the aim is achieved. It is informal because it was not planned, it was not structured, it was not necessary that time to have any professional, and education took place anywhere, anytime. That in those days, it relies on oral instruction. There was nothing written, no document written. People didn't know how to read or write, so everything is passed through the word of mouth from one generation to the other. What was the content of the Nigerian traditional education? It builds character and also involves skill acquisition. People were trained how to be how to be independent. They were taught how to fend for themselves. They had skills that could earn them money. They were trained in intellectual way. What were the methods of teaching? They were teaching by indoctrination, by modeling, initiation, reward and punishment, imitation, role play, literature, and traditional apprenticeship. They teach by giving instruction where the learner, the young one, did not have any must not query the instruction given. They teach by modeling, especially the young ones who are planning, who are being prepared to be queen in the palace. They teach them from the young age how to walk, how to move, how to behave, how to comport themselves. They also teach in those days by initiation, especially into cult. They teach by reward and punishment, rewarding good character, punishing bad behavior. They teach by imitation. They teach by role playing. Okay, you be this and see over this, let's see how you are going to do it. They teach oral literature like poems for hunters, poem for royal people, and poems for different people, even for the cult people. Then we have traditional apprenticeship, where people are put under professionals to learn a particular skill. Stages of educational development: we have the infancy, which is 0 to 5 years, where a little child is taught how to potty, how to greet, how to move around. We have the childhood stage, which is 6 to 12 years, where children are taught how to clean themselves, how to clean the house, how to learn a little way of cooking, and how to respect elders. We have the adolescent stage, 12 to 19 years, where a child is taught in sports, is taught in farming, is taught how to cook, how to be responsible in the society, and how to have a sense of belonging, how to involve in community development and some other things. Then we have the final stage, which is adulthood. Adulthood vary from place to place. It depends on the rule of a particular community. So an adult is grown up, is must be responsible to himself and to the family, to the community, must be able to do everything other adults are doing in the community, and so much is expected of an adult. At adulthood, one is ripe enough even for marriage, to start one's own family. Classification of traditional education. The first one is education for living in conformity with a tradition, where character is taught. The second one is education for economic self-reliance. That is where skill acquisition is taught. Education special occupation is where intellectual capacity is being taught, is being examined, where people are taught in the area of intellectual. They are taught how to memorize, they are taught how to recite incantation, they are taught how to do so many things. Types of higher education in the traditional society. As the former setting, nowadays the Western education has higher education. That is how the traditional society in Nigeria had higher education. In higher education, the first level of higher education is a secret cult, the Ogboni fraternity or some other cult. In those days, it is the bourgeoisie, it is the rich people, it is the community heads, the community leaders who are in these cults. They believe it gives them power, it gives them fame, and people were not ashamed to belong to those cults or to show that they are members of the cult. Unlike nowadays, the second stage is the traditional medicine. This in the traditional medicine, the people there are the native doctors. They treat various ailments and heal people. Advantages and disadvantages of Nigerian traditional education. The first advantage is that it makes everybody a functional member. Everybody is involved in the bringing up of a child in the traditional society. It involves the parent, the father, the mother, the sisters, the brothers. It involves the uncles, aunties, grannies, everybody in the community, even neighbors. Everybody takes responsibility of training a child. It inculcates high level of discipline. In those days, misbehavior was not this much. The hills were not this much. Disadvantages are that the traditional education was rigid. The traditional society was rigid in its approach. There was no flexibility, so they believe flexibility encourage misbehaviour, that it makes the rule not to be followed. So it's rigid in every form. There is too much do's and don'ts, too much taboos, and people were living in fear. People were threatened. You don't do this, if you do this, this will happen, and it will surely happen when they do it. So people were afraid. They don't misbehave, they don't do what they are not supposed to do. Another disadvantage is that instructions were not documented, because nobody knew how to read or write. So instructions were passed orally from one generation to the other. This is class activity. Take some time to study it. Thank you.